I never thought I'd be the woman telling this story. You know, the one who says, I had no idea what was happening right under my nose. But that's exactly what happened. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have sworn my husband, James, was the most loyal, devoted man on the planet. Turns out, I was just blind. It all started with small things. At first, I brushed them off. He started staying late at work more often. I figured he was just being responsible, trying to get ahead in his career. When he'd come home exhausted, barely able to keep his eyes open at dinner, I felt sorry for him. I even admired his dedication. But then, there were other things that didn't add up. James became oddly protective of his phone. He had never been the type to keep secrets. We used to scroll through funny memes together, laugh at dumb videos, even answer each other's calls if the other was busy. But suddenly, his phone was always face down on the table. If I walked into the room while he was texting, he'd quickly lock the screen or shift away slightly. At first, I ignored it. I told myself I was overthinking. But something in my gut wouldn't let it go. One night, I decided to test my paranoia. While he was in the shower, I reached for his phone, half expecting to find nothing. But when I tried to unlock it, I saw he had changed his passcode. My stomach dropped. James never changed his passcode. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Still, I wasn't ready to accuse him outright. I wanted proof. So, I started paying closer attention. He was dressing differently, nicer shirts, new cologne. He used to wear the same tired button-downs to work, but now he was suddenly concerned about how he looked. I tried to push down the uneasy feeling in my chest, but it kept creeping back up. Then came the lies. They weren't big at first. He'd say he had a meeting, but I'd call his office, and they'd say he left early. He told me he was grabbing drinks with coworkers, but when I casually asked one of them about it, they seemed confused. It was like watching a puzzle fall apart in slow motion, piece by piece, and all I could do was stand there, helpless. The final blow came on a random Wednesday evening. James had told me he had to work late again. But as I lay in bed scrolling through social media, I saw a post that changed everything. A friend of mine had uploaded a photo from a fancy restaurant downtown. In the background, barely noticeable, was James sitting across from a woman I didn't recognize. They weren't just sitting. They were leaning in close, her hand resting on his. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. My body went cold. I couldn't breathe. I clicked on the photo, zoomed in, convinced I was imagining things. But there it was. Proof. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I waited. I needed a plan. The next day, I told him I was going to visit my sister for the weekend. He barely reacted. In fact, he seemed almost relieved. That hurt more than anything. Instead of going to my sister's, I followed him after work. I felt ridiculous, like a character in some bad detective movie, but I needed to know. And sure enough, I watched as he parked his car outside a little boutique hotel. A few minutes later, the same woman from the photo walked out to meet him. They kissed right there in the street like they had nothing to hide. I didn't cry. Not then. I just turned around and left. James never saw it coming when I confronted him. He stammered, tried to deny it at first, then switched to excuses. It didn't mean anything. It was just a mistake. But the worst one? I still love you. Love? No. Love doesn't look like secret meetings and hidden texts. Love doesn't feel like betrayal. I packed my bags that night. I didn't give him a long speech or listen to more of his excuses. I just walked away. And you know what? I'm better for it. I walked away that night, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind numb. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. My hand shook as I drove, my suitcase in the back seat, my wedding ring burning a hole in my pocket. I had spent years believing in a lie, and now, all that remained was the sharp, cutting edge of truth. I checked into a hotel on the other side of town. It was small, unremarkable, but it gave me what I needed, distance. I sat on the stiff bed, staring at my phone, debating whether to tell anyone what had happened. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. The next morning, I woke to a dozen missed calls from James. Each voicemail was the same, his voice laced with desperation, his words a tangled mess of apologies and pleas. Please, just talk to me. I messed up, but we can fix this. I can't lose you. I deleted them all. Instead, I called my best friend, Rachel. The moment she heard my voice, she knew something was wrong. Where are you? She demanded. I told her everything. The phone. The lies. The photo. The hotel. By the time I finished, she was already in her car, driving to meet me. Rachel arrived at my hotel room with a bottle of wine, 2 pints of ice cream, and a fire in her eyes. You're not spending one more second crying over that cheating bastard, she declared, throwing her arms around me. That night, we sat on the hotel bed, drinking straight from the bottle and laughing through our tears. She reminded me of who I was before James, before I had let my world revolve around him. And that's when it hit me. I had spent so much time mourning the loss of our marriage, I had forgotten something important. James wasn't the only thing in my life. I still had me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I found an apartment downtown, tiny but perfect. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into work, and started going to therapy. The nights were still the hardest. I'd wake up, reaching for someone who was no longer there, only to remember that he had chosen someone else. But each morning, I got up. I pushed forward. And slowly, I started to heal. Then, one evening, James showed up at my door. I hesitated before opening it, my stomach twisting. When I finally did, I barely recognized the man in front of me. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled. He looked broken. I needed to see you, he said. I didn't invite him in. Instead, I crossed my arms. What do you want, James? I made a mistake, he whispered. I was stupid, selfish. I don't even know why I did it. It was never about her, it was about me. I lost sight of what mattered. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing. Just emptiness. I don't hate you, James, I said finally. But I don't love you either. Not anymore. Tears welled in his eyes. He reached for me, but I stepped back. You made your choice, I said. Now I'm making mine. And with that, I closed the door. I didn't cry. I didn't second-guess myself. Because for the first time in a long time, I was free. Weeks turned into months, and I found myself thriving. I traveled, I laughed, I lived. And one evening, sitting in a small cafe with Rachel, I caught the eye of a stranger across the room. He smiled. I smiled back. Maybe love wasn't dead after all. But this time, I wasn't in a rush to find it. I had already found the most important thing. Myself. The months following my confrontation with James felt like a storm slowly clearing. I had walked away from my marriage with my dignity intact, but that didn't mean I was unscathed. Healing wasn't a straight line, it was jagged, unpredictable. Some days, I felt powerful, like I had reclaimed my life. Other days, I stared at the ceiling at 2 a.m., wondering how I had been so blind. But I kept moving forward. I built a new routine. Morning coffee at the little cafe down the street. Evening jogs through the park. Weekend brunch with Rachel, where we laughed over mimosas and dissected the latest drama in her office. Slowly, the wounds became scars, and the scars became stories I could tell without breaking. Then, one evening, life threw me an unexpected twist. I was walking home from work when I heard someone call my name. My heart skipped a beat when I turned around and saw James standing a few feet away. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. The man who had once been so put together now looked like a shell of himself. What do you want, James? I asked, crossing my arms. He hesitated, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I need to talk to you. I sighed, already regretting stopping. We've said everything that needed to be said. No, we haven't, he insisted. Please. 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I nodded. We walked to a nearby bench, and I sat as far from him as I could without making it obvious. I messed up, he began, voice heavy with regret. I lost everything, and I deserved to. I said nothing. The woman, Sophia, she was nothing. I thought she made me feel alive again, but all she did was show me how lost I was. She left as soon as things got difficult. I kept thinking, if I hadn't been such a coward, if I had just talked to you instead of running to someone else. That's the thing, James, I interrupted. You had a choice. And you chose her. He flinched but nodded. I did. And I hate myself for it. I sighed, glancing at my hands. What do you expect from me, James? Forgiveness? No, he whispered. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. And that I still love you. My heart should have skipped a beat. Once upon a time, it would have. But now? It didn't even flinch. I looked him in the eye and said, that's not enough. And then I walked away. James's reappearance rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I had spent so long trying to forget him, yet here he was, a ghost in my new life. I tried to push it aside, but fate wasn't done playing games. A week later, I ran into Sophia. I was at a boutique, flipping through a rack of dresses, when I heard a familiar laugh. I turned, and there she was, the woman my husband had thrown away our marriage for. She was standing near the counter, chatting with a friend, looking effortlessly perfect. Something in me snapped. I wasn't the confrontational type. But seeing her so carefree while I had spent months picking up the pieces of my life? It burned. Before I knew what I was doing, I stepped forward. Excuse me, I said. She turned, eyes widening in surprise. Yes? I gave her a once-over. You don't know me, but I think you know my ex-husband. Realization dawned on her face. Oh. She hesitated. Look, No, you don't get to talk first, I cut in. I just have one question. Did you know about me? She swallowed hard. At first? No. But later, yes. I laughed bitterly. Of course. I'm sorry, she said, but it sounded empty. I never meant to hurt you. I stared at her, waiting for guilt to settle in, for some part of me to feel vindicated. But all I felt was, nothing. She wasn't worth it. James wasn't worth it. I had wasted enough of my energy on both of them. Good luck, I said simply, and walked out of the store, feeling lighter than I had in months. Life moved on. And then, just when I thought I was done with surprises, I met someone new. His name was Ethan. He was nothing like James, where James had been charming and smooth. Ethan was steady and warm. We met at the cafe where I had rebuilt my mornings, when he accidentally took my coffee order. We ended up laughing over it, and then talking. And then meeting again. And again. I was cautious, hesitant to let my walls down. But Ethan didn't rush me. He listened. He understood. He never made me feel like I had to shrink myself to fit into his world. And one evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sunset, he reached for my hand. You're safe with me, he said softly. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. I didn't get my fairy tale ending with James. But I got something better, a second chance at happiness. And this time, I wasn't afraid to take it. Life with Ethan was different from anything I had ever known. With James, I had always felt like I was walking on a tightrope, balancing my love for him with the fear that one misstep would send everything crashing down. But with Ethan, there were no games, no second guessing. He was solid, dependable, everything James had never been. Months passed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. We spent weekends exploring hidden bookstores, taking spontaneous road trips, and cooking elaborate meals that almost always ended in laughter and takeout. He made me feel safe. And yet, deep down, a tiny voice still whispered, What if it all falls apart again? That fear, that lingering doubt, came to a head on a rainy evening in November. Ethan had invited me to his place for dinner, but when I arrived, something felt off. He was quiet, distracted. As we ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Is everything okay? I finally asked. He hesitated. There's something I need to tell you. My stomach twisted. Here it comes. The betrayal. The secret. The thing that would ruin everything. Ethan ran a hand through his hair and took a deep breath. I ran into James. My fork clattered against my plate. What? I didn't plan to, but it happened. He found me. I swallowed hard. And? Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to talk about you. I pushed back my chair, already feeling the walls closing in. I don't want to hear this. Wait, Ethan said quickly, reaching for my hand. Just let me finish. I forced myself to stay, though my heart was pounding in my ears. He's not doing well, Ethan admitted. He looked rough. He said losing you was the biggest mistake of his life. That he's been trying to fix himself, but nothing feels right without you. I scoffed. He had his chance. I told him that, Ethan said. But I think he's desperate. And desperate people do stupid things. Something about the way he said it sent a chill through me. What do you mean? Ethan hesitated. I don't want to worry you, but I think he might try to find you. A sick feeling settled in my gut. James had already shown up once. And now? Now, he was seeking out Ethan? It felt like a warning, a storm brewing on the horizon. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in my apartment made me jump, every shadow seemed to stretch too far. I told myself I was being paranoid. James was pathetic, but he wasn't dangerous. Right? 2 days later, I got my answer. I was leaving work when I saw him. James was leaning against my car, looking like a ghost of the man I had once loved. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow. James, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. What are you doing here? He straightened, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I just needed to see you. I crossed my arms. You've seen me. Now leave. Please, he whispered. Just give me 5 minutes. I hesitated. Against my better judgment, I nodded. We walked to a nearby bench, the same way we had the last time. But this time, I wasn't scared. I wasn't the woman he had broken. I was the woman who had survived him. I don't know how to live without you, James admitted. I've tried. I've tried to move on, to be better, but nothing works. I keep waking up and reaching for you, and when I remember you're gone, it feels like I can't breathe. His words should have made me feel something, sadness, pity, anger. But all I felt was exhaustion. You don't miss me, I said softly. You miss control. You miss having someone who forgave you no matter what. He flinched, but I pressed on. You lost me the moment you chose her. And now that she's gone, you think you can just come back? Tears welled in his eyes. I made a mistake. I know, I said. And I hope you learn from it. But I'm not coming back, James. Not now, not ever. For a moment, he just sat there, his shoulders sagging under the weight of my words. Then, slowly, he nodded. I get it. I stood up. Goodbye, James. And this time, I knew it really was goodbye. Life went on. The encounter with James shook me, but it didn't break me. Instead, it solidified everything I already knew. I was finally free of him. Ethan and I grew closer, but this time, I wasn't rushing into anything. I let myself enjoy the moments without constantly fearing the end. And when he told me he loved me, I didn't panic. I believed him. Then, one evening, something happened that made my past and future collide in a way I never expected. I was at a cafe, waiting for Ethan, when a woman approached my table. She was tall, elegant, with familiar green eyes that made my stomach turn. "Are you?" She hesitated. "Are you James's ex-wife?" I tensed. "Who's asking?" She smiled sadly. "My name is Lillian. I'm his sister." I blinked. James had never mentioned a sister. "I know this is unexpected," she said quickly, seeing my shock. "But I need to talk to you. It's about James." 1,000 possibilities ran through my mind. Was he hurt? Did he do something drastic? What about him? I asked. Lillian sighed. "He's missing." My heart stopped. "What?" "He disappeared 2 days ago. No one's seen or heard from him. His apartment is empty. It's like he just vanished." I swallowed hard. James might have been a liar, a cheater, a manipulator, but he wasn't the type to disappear. And yet, here we were. The past wasn't done with me yet. To be continued.